Alright. So today we're gonna do some melodic rhythm, been called the future of dubstep. I think we're gonna look at how we make a color base and all the good stuff that goes into melodic rhythm. Alright, so we've got our project here, and boy oh boy is it something. So we're going for an outrageous tempo of 150 BPM. I don't know if you've used this tempo before, but if we dive into this intro, I just sort of wanted to make something big and atmospheric and, you know, atmospheric. So I started off with writing a few piano chords. I went for a 3 chord structure here. You can see we go D sharp, F sharp, G sharp. Lots of notes that are just chucked in there to make it sound really melodic and full, and you'll notice it's got a bit of delay on it. So I OTT'd it first, compression, and then just chucked a little delay on it, and then just cut the low end to clean it up in the mix, and that's so it fits nicely with this verse bass. And this bass is just a simple little saw bass that I made. So we got 7 voices on one, 11 on the other, bit of detune on each, filtering out the highs obviously. I put a bit of flanger and a bit of chorus on there to make it a bit more saucy. I started the intro with a generic little impact. And I also brought in a little atmospheric sample. I also added a few hi-hat hits. And sort of important part of this build is my color bases sitting in there behind the mix, and they are filtered out. They're sort of drained in reverb to just sit in the background. So that's just cuttings of my color base I'll explain that in the drop, but if we play those all together, we get a nice big sort of atmospheric sound. Then I transition into a bit of a verse, and I just use the crash cymbal to signal that transition, as you always do. I've brought in more of a proper drum loop with kicks and snares. I also added another tonal ambience just to amp up the atmosphere again. And then of course I've got heaps of rises and downlifters to just, again, add some more atmosphere. After one of the drum loops, I added this little verse melody, which is just a little pluck pattern that I chucked in there to just sort of spice up the verse a bit. It sounded a bit boring without it, so this is just adding something. This is just a little pluck preset from Cymatics that just fits really nicely into what I'm trying to build. And on the last loop of my chords, I transition into this sort of like just the chords sort of rise up higher, and it sort of signals that we're moving into a new part of the section, which will be the build up. I'm going to use that building chord progression in the drop to signify the end of the drop. For the build, I just put my verse bass onto a singular note, which is the D sharp, so that just goes all the way up until the drop hits. And I also added this kind of heavy 808. And that's working in unison with my kicks. That adds like a nice heavy element to the build up. It's telling you that this might actually be a dubstep track, not some just atmospheric melodic thing. I've just used a flex preset there. I'm using the distorted one, and I've adjusted the delay and the attack and the sustain and all that, so it hits and fades away as I like it. Then I've added some claps. Of course we have some kicks in there and some build snares. Added some big rises. And my color bases are added underneath the drop, just filtering in and sort of teasing the drop a bit. Wow. I feel sorry for my CPU sometimes. This boy gets beat. You get the idea. And I end the build with this sort of chime inspired soda can opening. So I just got a sample of someone opening a can, a little sweep, and some Coke soda carbonation sounds. Oh yeah. So I thought the best place to start for this drop was to show you actually how to make a color base. And there's probably so many different ways you can do this, even depending on what DAW you're using. So you want to find yourself just a pretty generic sort of dubstep bass. Obviously we're making melodic riddim, so you want a sort of riddim bass there. So I'm going to put this on the D sharp because that's the first note of our song. So the bass is the first thing. The second thing is to have a chord progression, and in my project I have the piano chords as my chord progression, so I just copy and pasted that into a stock serum saw. So let's draw in some chords. Wow, beautiful. Anyway, for the purpose of this sound design, all we need to do is highlight a section like that, and then what I did was I exported it as a WAV file. So I exported that into a new folder, and I've got all the different chords here because I'm using a chord progression for my drop, but now we're just using D sharp. Anyway, we have our bass in insert 1, so first thing we need to do is open up Fruity Convolver. That's the one. Now we go to our folder, we get our exported sound, and we chuck that in there. And keep in mind this is a super short sample. You saw where we got it from. Get our sample in here, pull down the dry. Now when we play our bass, we will have this. So already we're getting a bit of color from that. We can pull up the dry depending on how much bass we want in it. But other than that, I haven't really done much else other than use different basses and use different chords, chord sounds, chord progressions, whatever, just get creative with it. But that is a simple way of making a color base. Right, so back in our project now. So we've got 3 separate layers in here, but essentially we're doing the same thing with the convolver. The only added thing is I'm just camel crushing, sausage fattener, OTT, bit of EQ, and more OTT, and that just makes that simple sound that we made with the convolver sound a lot bigger. And altogether they create a big sound. I've cut the low end of the color bases just so the bass end, the sub end, doesn't get all muddy. And I've put in a separate bass layer just to make sure that's nice and clean. What we have here is just a sort of dubstep bass. And then just a mid-end sort of bass. And you'll notice that the color bass and the bass is sort of just wop 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 is a color bass, and the basses are sort of changing speed, and I've just automated the LFO speeds to make them speed up and slow down, and that adds a bit of variation. But essentially that is what I've used to make the color bass drop. It's just the bass with the fruity convolver on top of it, post-process the shite out of that, chuck Sauce Fatnik, Camel Crusher, OTT, whatever you want, man. Then of course we need some drums, so I've just gone for the simple sort of rhythm beat with a few different changes in there. Add some rides to that. And also some off hats. For the middle of the drop, I just created a sort of cool sounding pluck fill. And obviously that's just a little 3-note thing. And what I've done to make that is just get a serum preset and layer that with a kick. What I've done in the post-processing is I've just made them real wide. Even the kick has heaps of stereo enhancer on it, and that just sort of, as you're going through the drop and you just hit that, it's sort of a weird sort of fill to put in the middle. Keeps it interesting. And then I sort of have a break, and what I'm doing here is I'm automating some flanger on, and that's over the whole drop bus, and I'm just automating the level of that to sort of make a cool effect with the flanger. For the second half of the drop, I change up the speed transitions. I keep it going a lot faster in a lot of places, as you hear in lots of just dubstep drops in general. The first half sort of starts off a bit slow, and the second half is just let your hair down, you know, get a bit crazy. Another thing I've done in the second part of the drop is just put these cool little color bass pitch ups in. And to do that, I had to go into my Fruity Convolver and physically change the stretch, and doing this will either pitch it up and down, but there's no way to create an automation clip, so your boy had to do it manually. Press record and pull that stretch down, well, up. But that's essentially what goes into a color bass melodic rhythm sort of drop. I mean, you can get a lot more complex than this. You can start throwing leads on there, you can start throwing different basses in there, but essentially we've got a color bass, we've got a bass, we've got a sub, we've got rhythm drums. It's pretty sorted, so let's see how it sounds.